What's up, everyone? My name is Trent. This is Rams Talk. Thank you for tuning in to the 2020 Rams Undrafted Free Agent Defense Edition. Now, if you haven't seen the Offense Edition, just click on this little guy right here, sit back and enjoy. It's 27 minutes of heaven right there. But if you haven't seen it, then here you go, new content. Now, I've had a lot of new subscribers since my last couple of videos. So if you're new to the community, welcome to the channel. Glad to have you on board. And for all of the older subscribers, thanks for tuning in yet again to another edition of Rams Talk. So, like I said, the last edition was the offense. Now we're going to focus on the defense. There were 22 undrafted free agents in all. Initially 20, but then the Rams signed 2 more. So it was originally 10 and 10, and then they tacked on 2 more defensive players. So this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive. Now, I find this very interesting, more interesting than past years or previous years because of Hard Knocks. So if the season happens, which is getting kind of dicey. I mean, like, we're talking about first game of the season 2 months from now, and 2 preseason games. Who knows what the camp will be? So, I mean, things are still very much in the air. But if there is a Hard Knocks, they usually, you're going to get your star player action, but it's always these interesting personalities and the guys who really have, the pressure on whether or not they're going to make the squad. So that is going to be getting to know these players along with the offensive undrafted free agents is going to be really interesting to kind of know their story a little bit more and have an idea of where they're coming from. So just generally speaking, and if you saw the last episode, you know this, but a little refresher that the Rams have about 40 undrafted free agents on their roster. I mean, that's not just guys from this year, but those are undrafted free agents from last year, undrafted free agents from another team that were waived and then the Rams picked up. But around 40 undrafted free agents in total on their current roster, which sits at around 89 to 90. That will get trimmed down, as you know. There's the 53-man roster, now this is kind of tricky. This is kind of a sidebar story, but 53-man roster, a lot of talk about how it expanded to 55, but that's really because the practice squad increased from 10 to 12, and there's a lot more flexibility of bringing a practice squad player up to the active roster. So they call it a 55-man roster, but it's really like, it's 53 plus 12, so it's really 65 active roster and practice squad. So if they're at 89, 90 now, they kick it down to 65, including practice squad. So now you're looking at a cut of 24 to 25 guys. So that's kind of the whittling that the Rams are going to have to do with all of these undrafted free agents. So when I mentioned the amount of undrafted free agents, at the beginning of last year, they did an analysis across the NFL, and about 30% of all NFL rosters were comprised of undrafted free agents. So 30%, that's a huge chunk. And the reason why undrafted free agents really get a lot of shine or a lot of opportunity, if you will, is, and let's just be honest, the Corey Littletons are an exception, but the Troy Readers are really the rule. Like the guys that are solid rotational players, might get waived a couple times, get some, play in several games on other teams, special teams kind of deal, but they get a lot of action, the undrafted free agents typically do. So, this is like a game within the game of all these guys. Now, there's a guy, Thor Nystrom, for Roto World, and he ranked the Rams undrafted free agents class at 8th overall. So they have some guys who can come in and do some damage. But to get back to what I was going to say about these guys coming in, look at the Troy Readers, look at the Troy Hills and the Darius Williams and the Natrez Patricks and these guys, Malcolm Brown on the offensive side, Dante Dayan. They played a significant portion of in the Rams games last year. So these guys cannot be discounted. They're very useful, and so that's why we should know. So it's kind of like you watch these couple videos, you get to know these guys a little bit more, and then maybe in a couple of years one pops, and you kind of feel like you're with them from the beginning. And the only reason, look at Greg Robinson that the Rams drafted. He drafted number 2 overall. how many undrafted free agent or tackles were signed in the NFL that have had better NFL careers than him? And the only reason why he was really playing last year for the Browns was because he was a number 2 overall pick. And a lot of these guys, you'll have like the you'll be like backlogged on the roster in your position group because you're an undrafted free agent, whereas the team is always going to give way more opportunity to a guy that they drafted. They're not going to admit a mistake. So a lot of these guys don't get chances on certain teams because they're so far down on the depth chart. Meanwhile, you have these top draft picks that really aren't performing. So sometimes it's unfair, but the cream usually does rise to the top. So let's see what the cream is on the Rams defensive undrafted free agent list. So when I looked at this list, there were really like 3 things that stood out. 1, 3 guys from the FCS. So that's like Division 1B. So, there were fewer FCS players drafted this year, mainly because of COVID, and teams really just didn't get to see them, and they didn't have a lot of combine action. On the defensive side, the Rams have 4 defensive back / cornerback players that they signed and 3 inside linebackers. Now I'm going to start with the inside linebackers because I feel like this is the most intriguing position because the Rams really don't have any bona fide inside linebackers on their team. They got Micah Kiser, who hasn't really played, because of injuries, and he's the presumed like alpha dog on that list. Then you have a combination of Travin Howard, Kenny Young, Troy Reeder, and then the rookie Clay Johnston out of Baylor, right? And so you have these guys these 5 guys that really don't have many reps. They played in games, special teams, rotational, but they were never like the guy, like a Corey Littleton or another like full-time starting caliber inside linebacker. So I feel like this position has a lot can happen in training camp. It wouldn't surprise me if, Travin Howard or Troy Reeder or Travin Howard or Kenny Young, like maybe one of them doesn't make the team. That's a possibility, right? I don't think it's possible, but it can happen. So there are 3 guys that all look really, on paper and even on tape, really awesome. And every time you read any kind of profile on an inside linebacker, you're going to hear the word tackling machine. So these guys, especially the first 2 guys, or the first and third guy, were like serious tackling machines when they went to school. So the first guy I'm going to talk about is Christian Rozenboom. Now he's 6'2", 230 out of South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits. And all he did was, over his 4 years at South Dakota State, rack up 475 tackles. He led the Jacks in tackles all 4 years. He's the all-time leader in tackles. I should hope so, 475. He had 29 tackles for losses, 8 interception, and he was a 4-time All-Missouri Valley Conference first-team player. So made the first team. So that is, I know it's the FCS and South Dakota, right? But that's impressive. Those are some really, really nice numbers. So then there's a pro football focus element to this. So he had a 91 rush defense grade, which was 6th in the nation. He had an 88.3 overall grade, which was 8th in the nation. And he had a 52.2 passer rating when targeted rating, which was 11th in the nation. So I feel like he's like a Clay Johnston, right? And, one thing I think this goes without saying, is that what will really make the mark with a lot of these players, what might make the difference, is special teams. So how quickly can Christian Rozenboom, make an impact on special teams? So he's going to be battling it out. And by the way, if football doesn't work out for him, he'd like to be a veterinarian. So Christian Rozenboom, future vet after NFL career. But I like Christian Rozenboom. You watch him play, and he's tenacious. And then the second guy was, these other 2 guys were the 2 that the Rams added after the initial wave of UDFAs. And the second guy was because he was flagged, he had a knee issue. It was flagged during the pre-draft process. So he went undrafted. He couldn't go to the combine. He went undrafted. And then once the medicals cleared, the Rams signed him. So like teams were just kind of waiting because he had this red flag next to his name. They were waiting till the medicals passed, and then the Rams pounced on him. And he was projected to be a day 3 pick in the draft. He went to Tennessee. His name is Daniel Bituli, 6'3", 250, originally from the Congo, and he led Tennessee in tackles the last 3 years that he played. He had with 266 career tackles. He was the All-SEC second team, which is saying a lot. I mean, for an inside linebacker out of all those SEC teams to make the second team, which is pretty good. The Vols had a really good defense, and he was a part of that. And yeah, so I mean, like he doesn't. If you look at the just pure production, 475 tackles to 266 tackles. Granted, Bituli played in one fewer season. He played in the SEC, which is the level of competition is far superior than the Missouri Valley, but production is production. So Daniel Bituli is kind of like one of their blue chip undrafted free agents that they have. So right now it's gonna be between him and Rozenboom. This next guy, when we talk about Bryan London II, 6'2", 230, out of Texas State. Texas State Bobcats, by the way. He was a 2-time first-team All-Sun Belt. So, I just love some of these conferences we're talking about here. And his freshman year, he had 141 tackles. So imagine you go to a Division I school, an FBS school, and your freshman year, you have 141 tackles, which is a school record for a freshman. That's pretty crazy. He has 459 all-time tackles. He's the leader at a school, and in the FBS, he's ranked 10th. I think this is from 2006 when they did the FCS thing. He's 10th overall out of all FBS players in career tackles, right? Number 1 on that list, Luke Kuechly. Makes sense, right? Who else is on that list is Bobby Wagner with 445. So this guy, Bryan London II, had more career tackles than Bobby Wagner and pretty much almost every other linebacker since 2006. He had 22 tackles in a game, and when I was watching some of his tape, I showed him tackling Xavier Jones, the guy that the Rams drafted from SMU, the running back. So that was kind of interesting. You have Sun Belt adversaries there. So yeah, that's Bryan London II. So between him, Bryan London II, Daniel Bituli, and Chase Rozenboom, that's going to be a 3-man race. I mean, which one of those is going to shine in special teams? Then you have them going against Kenny Young, Traven Howard, Troy Reeder, and Clay Johnston. So that's going to be pretty juicy right there, because the Rams really don't have anything at middle linebacker that we know for certain. We lost Corey Littleton, Bryce Hager, so it's kind of it's wide open. That's what I'm trying to say. It's wide open. Okay, so those are the linebackers, and that's going to be interesting to watch. Now, the next big group are the cornerbacks, defensive backs, safety kind of mix you have there. Now, on the roster right now, you have Jalen Ramsey, Troy Hill, David Long, Terrell Burgess. Burgess is kind of a hybrid guy, Deon Dayton, and Darius Williams. So, I mean, who knows? Dayan may not make it. Darius Williams may not, but I mean, I think Darius Williams definitely will, because he had a good season last year. Now, what you're really looking for is versatility, and also you're looking for nickel. So it's Nickel Roby-Coleman left, so that leaves this open slot there. And right now, I think that's David Long's to lose. But which guy, and Brandon Staley loves versatility, so which guy can play kind of that all-around DB position? Can you kind of move to safety? Can you put in the box? Can blitz? Can cover in the slot? Maybe cover outside? So like the more things you can do, it's obvious the better chances you have of making the roster. So the first guy that I want to talk about is a guy from Florida State, Levonta Taylor. Now Levonta Taylor, 5'10", 190, and he was the number 1 cornerback coming out of high school. In fact, he was the number 5 player overall in the nation coming out of high school, according to the top ESPN 300. So he's one of those blue chip guys, but he was derailed by injuries. Classic story right there, right? Could have made it, except I was injured. So, if he can prove to be healthy, he could really just be that diamond in the rough. Now, he didn't really play too much outside. He kind of played inside a little bit more. His frame is a bit small. His size is like Janoris Jenkins. Think of him as a Janoris Jenkins type of player. And he can play in the box. He can blitz. He's very fiery, very physical. And he has great awareness and sideline to sideline speed. So, based on his versatility of playing the nickel, playing in the box, that could really be the difference. And, if he stays healthy, then, maybe his talent comes through. But I don't really see him as one of the outside cover guys. And obviously we already have one for sure. So, it's going to be special teams, and it's going to be kind of like that Terrell Burgess type of player, that can play all over the place in the secondary. Second guy, his name is Dayan Lake, but his real last name is Guanwoloko. He ran a 4.41 40, and he went to BYU. Now, when I talk about him, I'm thinking like Nick Scott, right? So he didn't really excel as a cornerback or a defensive back or a safety who was batting down passes and shutting guys down and things like that. He just was kind of a Swiss Army knife, always around the ball, great athletic characteristics and traits. And I've got some crazy stats, but he's from Liberia, which is in West Africa, near the Ivory Coast and Sierra Leone and Ghana. Everyone knows this stuff. The capital of Liberia is Monrovia. Monrovia is also a city in California. Maybe destiny right there. But Dayan Lake, here's some weird stats for you. He had 7 fumble recoveries, 7 interceptions in his career, with 226 interception return yards. He had 62 tackles last year, 4.5 tackles for a loss, and he had 9 tackles against USC, including a game-winning interception. And he was a 4-time Defensive Player of the Week in the Mountain West Conference. So he, to me, is going to have to make his mark in special teams. He's not going to be a cornerback or a safety or a defensive back. He's going to be making his mark in special teams, kind of like a Nick Scott guy. So that's really, and I think he's got that willingness to do so. So Dayan Lake or Dayan Guanwoloko. Yeah, say that 5 times fast. Now the next guy that I like in the secondary or for the defensive back, safeties kind of thing, JuJu Hughes out of Fresno State, team captain there, more listed as a safety, 5'11", 188. He played in all 52 games there. He had 80 tackles last year with 2 interceptions. He had the 10th best secondary grade in 2018 by Pro Football Focus. He had a total career of 247 tackles, 28 pass deflections, and played well on special teams. So I saw an interview with him at a press conference after a game, and just seemed very bright, seemed very dialed in, like the type of player Rams are like. Not saying that these other guys aren't. I just haven't heard all of them talk. But he seems like a guy that he brings that versatility of being safety/DB, and he has leadership qualities. So JuJu Hughes, wouldn't be surprised if he made the practice squad. Even though the Rams are kind of set at secondary, you never know how things are going to pan out, but he's an interesting guy to follow. Then the last guy that they have is Tyreek McGee, 5'10", 187 out of Georgia. Georgia had a top-rated defense last year. He played in 55 games for the Bulldogs, had 2 interceptions last year, 59 tackles, and 11 pass deflections. So, I don't know. I don't want to say some guy just is maybe the long shot. I think Tyreek McGee is the long shot here out of this group. You never know. He played in the SEC, so he does have that. But there's nothing really about his numbers that jump out at me. So Tyreek McGee, someone to monitor. Maybe he's featured in Hard Knocks, but Tyreek McGee. That's kind of all I got on Tyreek McGee right there. So that wraps up that group. Now we're going to move to edge because edge was a position of need, is a position of need. Who knows how Terrell Lewis works out or Leonard Floyd works out, but we have those two guys there. We have Ebukam and we have spacing out on a guy. Terrell Lewis, Ebukam. God. Anyways, sorry. Just total brain fart on our edge players this year. But Leonard Floyd. So one guy that had the highest ranking and was kind of like most likely to make the Rams roster is a guy named Jonah Williams out of Weber State, FCS. Jonah Williams, 6'5", 280, ran a 4.67. And Thor Nystrom, the guy from Roto World, he rated in his undrafted or his total prospects, defensively, he was the highest rated guy, and the Rams grabbed him off the waiver wire, so to speak, assigned him. He was the Big Sky Co-Defensive Player of the Year last year. In his college career, he racked up 194 tackles, 28 tackles for a loss, and 15 sacks. So last year he had 7.5 sacks. The year before, his junior year, for some weird reason, had 0 sacks. I don't know why. But he was part of the winningest senior class in Weber State history with 3 Big Sky titles and 4 FCS playoff appearances. And he was, like I said, Bleacher Report said that he was most likely to make the Rams roster out of all of their undrafted free agents. So Jonah Williams, big guy, watch his tape and he's in there. He looks impressive. I think out of the next 2 guys I'm going to name is Jonah Williams, and that's really it. Because a lot of people have been talking about the next guy, Greg Reeves, 6'2", 240, out of USF, Southern Florida. And he was a multi-year academic All-American and very bright guy, good kid, just does everything right. Not to say Jonah doesn't, but, this is kind of it sets him apart. He played in 37 consecutive games, 212 career tackles, 30.5 tackles for a loss, but a career of 8.5 sacks, right? 8.5 sacks? Jadeveon Clowney gets more than 8.5 sacks, and that's saying something. So, 14 tackles in a 2018 Gasparilla Bowl, kind of a highlight right there, and he was tied for 25th in rush defense, according to Pro Football Focus, and he was 17th in coverage grade from Pro Football Focus in 2017 because these edge guys to drop back into coverage as well. But Greg Reeves, a lot of hype around him. I think he has an uphill battle to make the roster. I think just on paper right now, Jonah Williams is 3 inches taller, 40 pounds heavier, and he's very good athletically. So Greg Reeves has an uphill battle. The next guy, Eric Banks, out of the University of Texas, San Antonio. He played on the same team as Marcus Davenport, who the Saints traded a couple picks for in the first round a couple years ago, coming off the other edge. Eric Banks' physical traits are compared to AJ Epinesa, who was just drafted by the Bills, I believe. 7.5 career sacks, never had more than 2 in a season, 81 career tackles, 20.5 tackles for a loss. If you don't have more than 2 sacks in a season, you play edge. Unless you're a run-stopping guy, unless you're a drop-back in the coverage guy like Leonard Floyd, not super impressive, but Leonard Floyd, I think, had more than 2 sacks a year. Unless there are other elements of his game that the Rams then Eric Banks, uphill battle. So there you go. That wraps up the edge. Jonah Williams, definitely practice squad at least. Greg Reeves, Eric Banks, no. But you never know. Now we're going to wrap it up with the defensive line. And Sam Renner, 6'4", 270 out of Minnesota. Now, he's more of a defensive end in a 3-4, and he had 43 tackles, 8 tackles for a loss, and 5 sacks in his career. And apparently, what his thing is that he showed marked improvement every year. And there's a belief that, getting a year on a practice squad, getting some NFL coaching, that he'll continue this progression. I mean, everyone's trying to continue the progression, right? But his was it was a clear progression across the board for him. So that's what he has going for him. And Minnesota was ranked last year, so they were a good team. He played in good defense. But this is probably the next guy is my favorite guy. I hope he makes the roster. On Hard Knocks, they're going to love this guy. His name is Michael Hoecht, spelled Hoecht, like Hoecht, but it's pronounced Hoecht. He went to Brown. He is 6'4", 310 pounds. But what really caught people's attention with him is he made this, because of COVID, and he's in the FCS because the Brown is an Ivy League school. He made this tape of his, running all the drills in the 40, and this virtual tape was passed around and created some buzz. He ran a 4.65 40 at 310 pounds. And when you see watch his actual game tape, he's busting through the line and he's chasing down quarterbacks and running backs left and right. And it's pretty remarkable, this beast of a man, who then when you hear him talk is super articulate. He's an Ivy League guy, right? And it shows. So his 40 time would have been the 3rd fastest at his position, interior lineman, had he been at the combine. So he's fast and he's good. And he's, when you hear him talk, he's just super articulate. So I found all these nuggets about him. But he had 69 tackles last year, which was 10th in the Ivy League. 69 tackles from an interior lineman is pretty good. The Ivy League sends more players to the NFL than any other FCS conference. Very weird, right? But, shout out to Ryan Fitzpatrick from Harvard. And then he was also drafted 10th in the 2nd round of the CFL draft by the Ottawa Red Blacks. I don't know what a red black is. Does anyone know what a red black is? Let me know. And he's also, when he was in high school, he was the senior member of the Oakwood Sustainable Energy Team. There are a couple other interesting things about his extracurriculars that are pretty interesting. But Michael Hoecht, I hope you make the team. If there is training camp and Hard Knocks happens, we're going to get a heavy dose of Michael Hoecht, and I'm very, very happy about it. I'm here for that. So Michael Hoecht, I'm rooting for you, man. So to wrap it up, the guys that I have, the cream of the crop of these 12 players are Michael Hoecht, his speed on the interior, he's smart. Jonah Williams, he was the conference defensive player of the year, coming off the edge. Bryan London III, the linebacker out of Texas State, all-time tackles leader at Texas State, 10th all-time in FBS. Daniel Bituli, another inside linebacker out of Tennessee. If he can be healthy, then he'll be great, but he was a leading tackler on an SEC team. Then you have Chase Rozenboom, the inside linebacker out of South Dakota State, the Jacks. Highly decorated PFF and just everything across the board. A lot of accolades for Chase Rozenboom. Levonta Taylor, the Florida State cornerback, defensive back, blue chip prospect, versatile, but can he stay healthy? Can he play the nickel? And then you have Dayan Lake, the guy out of BYU, more of a special teams guy, Nick Scott. So that's really where he's going to find his groove. Can he do that? He's very versatile. And then JuJu Hughes, the safety out of Fresno State, also very versatile. So we'll see how those guys do. So there you go. That's the wrap up for the undrafted free agents. I have a feeling that a couple of those guys are definitely going to make either the practice squad or the active roster. It will happen. But I'm approaching almost 30 minutes here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, if you're new to the channel, check out some other videos. I'm going to start the music right about now. So subscribe. If you're watching this for the first time, just subscribe. Get the Rams Talk stuff. You can find me on Twitter at RealLARamsTalk, Instagram LA Rams Talk. And I'm going to have a bunch of more content coming out. So Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and as always, go Rams.